Him till I die on the battlefield, oh my Lord. Praise the name of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. We are here again to study, to show ourselves approved unto God, to become a workman who need not be ashamed, rightly dividing the word of truth. It's imperative that we study. That's what the Lord was saying when he said, take my yoke upon me, learn of me. And my yoke is easy, my burden is light. He wants us to do something. We need to take an active role in our development. Here we are at the J.T. Kerr Memorial Baptist Church. And I try to reemphasize it is Jacksonville, North Carolina, because everybody who hears us and somebody in any part of the world can access us, and they don't know where they're accessing from, but they may hear something and they stick right there. You know, when I'm surfing the internet and doing things, I run across things that I may take a moment to listen to. If I hear something I don't like, I'll go to something else. I'm sure that people do that same thing with us. So I'm not offended. So on last week, of course, our whole topic was about resurrection as it compares with people who call it Easter. And if you are comfortable, it doesn't matter what other people call it, doesn't matter what you call it, as long as you know what you are celebrating and who you are worshiping. Some people don't know the difference. So that means, sometimes ignorance is bliss, but ignorance is no excuse. The highway patrolman will tell you that. Because you didn't know, you didn't supposed to do that. That's never going to be an excuse because you didn't know, because the knowledge is available. So at this point in time, we have been sort of going through trying to make sure that we go through every aspect of the Bible. And right now we are still focusing. The whole delegation seems like it's coming. But we also try to make sure, I want to make sure that everybody has this sheet, because I'm just going to emphasize where we are. I want to emphasize where we are in the scheme of things. We need to know that everybody is kind of catching up. And if you're not catching up, then you can go back and look at where we are and go from there. So what he's doing is just the books of the Bible. At some point in time, everybody has gotten this, but it doesn't matter if you get more than one. Maybe you got one somewhere in your house and somewhere in another place in your house, and wherever you are, you can see it. So this is really just a table of contents of the Bible, that we have it divided up so that you will know where you are. When you take a Bible, you don't see the way you just have a whole Bible with 66 books in it. But what you have on this sheet, you divided it up. And since we had last week just talking about one subject, I just want to kind of bring us up to date with where we are and where we started from. Some may not have been here when we started from the beginning, but at some points in time, we go from the beginning to the end, and we go back to the beginning. Now, that takes a long period of time, but that is why I tell people that Rome wasn't built in a day, and you won't know the Bible in a day either. One session of Bible study will not get it. That's only just like starting with your ABCs. Now, if everybody has this sheet, we're going to follow this sheet and see where we are and where we've been. If you've got the sheet, then I know that everybody's on the same page. We started out in the beginning of the Bible with Genesis. And of course, Genesis is the law. That's where we start. We call that section of 5 books. That section of 5 books is called the law. That is fundamental to your understanding of the Bible, because throughout the Bible, throughout the Old Testament, they live according to the law. And the law is the only guidance that they have, is the law. So throughout the Old Testament, throughout the entire Old Testament, they are following the law. The law is authored by Moses, and most of the time it's referred to in various ways, the books, the 5 books of Moses, which is another word for the Pentateuch. I'm saying all these things over because it ought to hit your memory if you've been in it through the whole time. The Pentateuch is another word for the 5 books of the law, the Pentateuch, the 5 books of Moses, and those were the foundation. That was the only thing written that the children of Israel had up until the time that they start gathering the words of the poets and the prophets. These were the written guidelines, and it was fundamental to everybody. If you were one of the children of Israel, you had to be familiar with the law. So it was automatic. That's what you lived by. Those books that were added later, they came at specific times. So we have the law, and name out the books of the law so that you will say them at least one time in your life. A lot of times people have never named out the books, they never said them. So when you get to Habakkuk, you ain't never said it, so you don't know how to pronounce it. Is that right? Am I saying stuff foreign? Oh, so you got Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. And all of those each book tells you what it is. The name of the book tells you what it is. As so with all of the books. The name, in other words, sometimes we think things are so mysterious, and I think sometimes we're afraid of the book because of what it's named, and really it's not anything that is complicated. It tells you what it is. Genesis, I tell you over and over again, that is a Greek word. And it's a Greek word that means in the beginning. The word itself means in the beginning. So if you were reading this book and it was in Greek, but it had to be anglicized for you to read it because they wouldn't even spell it like we spell it. But Genesis is saying in the beginning. Those are the first 2 words, first 3 words of the Bible, and it's really one word in Greek. And that word is Genesis. All right? That's not mysterious, but that's what it is. Genesis means in the beginning. Now, I will have to do a whole lot of explaining to it for those individuals who are curious enough to say, why is the first book in the Bible a Greek word? Now, that may not even hit anybody's, that may not have hit your curiosity, because the Bible the Old Testament is primarily what language? It's Hebrew. But keep in mind, over a period of time, the whole Bible was translated into Greek. And for a long period of time, the Greek language dominated anybody who was in religion or education. And when they finally got to the point of the term should become familiar with, once they canonized the Bible as we know it, once they canonized $10, once they canonized the Bible, then they went about and said that these are the names that we're going to use. for each book. And they became standardized once it was canonized. If somebody doesn't know what canonized mean, I have to stop to explain it. And don't feel embarrassed if you never heard that word. It has nothing to do with a cannon that fires explosive rounds. It's nothing like that. Okay, so everybody understands that. The canonization of the Bible, as we know it, took place in 325 AD. So if you don't know what canonized means, you know when it was canonized, 325 AD. The second book of the Bible, of course, is Exodus. Everybody knows what that means? I told you that within the Bible, it's exit. That prefix, Exodus, is the same prefix that we have on the doors that you exit from. So the purpose of Exodus was to describe what took place with the children of Israel when they were in captivity, in slavery, and they exited under the leadership of whom? All right, see, all of that needs to be kind of automatic to your understanding. They exited under the leadership of Moses. Moses himself was born in slavery. Now, the unique thing about him being born in slavery is that the people who enslaved him were people of Egypt. So what does that mean to you? They were African. That still may not mean anything. But Egypt is now one of the 54 countries in Africa. Egypt is just one of the 54 countries, but then the Egypt, as we have told you, there are only 3 regions in the Old Testament: Egypt, Mesopotamia, and Canaan. Those are the only 3 regions in the Bible. Now, this war going on in the Middle East, well, they would have been a part of Mesopotamia. If we would go back and transpose and put them back in time, their roots are in Mesopotamia. I'm trying to fix it so everything you say about the Bible will be connected, and you will have a framework in your mind about how the Bible is connected. Everything I say about the Bible, you ought to be able to connect it somewhere, even in modern day. Leviticus has to do with what? Okay, good. Levites and rituals are part of, because everything that deals with worship in the temple was done through the Levites, whose beginning came when Moses assigned his brother Levi to be in charge. From this henceforward, all of his offspring automatically became the caretakers of the temple. Whether it didn't have nothing to do with your righteousness, it just had to do with your bloodline. You follow whatever your daddy did, that's what you do. That's how it was. And so if your daddy worked in the temple, then you work in the temple. And that includes the musicians, that includes the custodians, that includes the priest. All of those are from the same tribe. And that was the book of Leviticus is going to tell you everything how they operated the temple. Now, I know this is boring, but if you want to learn, you got to learn boring stuff too. Is that right? I mean, when I was going to school, I say this is so boring, but it's stuff you had to learn. Now, I'm hoping that it's something that you want to learn. Then, of course, you get the numbers, and everybody, they get confused and say, well, do they really mean numbers like you count? Yes, that is what it's about. I mean, you wouldn't think that automatically, because the Bible, you think it's something mysterious. You're thinking that this is kind of, throwing you off, just like Job and Job. That throws you off. So you think numbers is throwing you off. Numbers is really, that's what it's about. They're taking a national census. They count the children of Israel as they are. This is when in Exodus, if they have left out of the land of Egypt and they're going out And then Leviticus starts telling you the rituals that they were following while they were going through this process. And so during that time, they were also, God instructed them to count the number of men. They never did count the number of women and children, never did. Count the number of men who are of an age to fight. They were of an age to fight. And that's what numbers is. It was a national census. They counted and they used numbers throughout that book. You start seeing the numbers of how many men were in each tribe who were able to take up a sword and fight. And you'll read that and find out more. Deuteronomy. That's some, it's not tricky, but there's something in that word in its prefix and in the suffix that tells you what it's about. If you have studied any Romance languages, Spanish, French, all of them have that same prefix. Un, deux, trois. Deux is always two. And ons, dos, two. So this deux is a derivative of that. It means two, second. So this is the second autonomy. It has to do with law. This is the second law or repeated law. It's the repeated law. It's the repeated law. In other words, the only place you will find the 10 Commandments is when it was first given. And when do you think it was first given? During their exit. That's when it was first given. And you'll find it in the 20th chapter of Exodus. You'll start seeing the 10 Commandments as it came. When you get to Deuteronomy, it's repeated. And it starts also around the 20th chapter of Deuteronomy, where it starts reiterating or repeating the law. Because what Moses is doing, he's on his way out. To be here he is. He's 120 years old now. By the time you close Deuteronomy, he's 120 years old, which means that he came and got the children out of Egypt. He was 80. You say, well, okay. There were a whole lot of old people in the Bible anyway, so that's not even old comparing. And when he came to his end, he still. The Bible describes him as having clear eyes. In other words, there wasn't nothing wrong with him. You know, he didn't die because he was sick. It was just time for him to depart from the people, and nobody don't know where he's buried. Bible, because if they had known where he's buried, they would have made him deity. They would have made a statue. They would turn it into the Mosaic religion, as we have a tendency to do. In fact, it's been done too many times. Okay, question, comment. That's the whole books. That's the books of the law, the Pentateuch. And that's why all of them are self-contained there, 5 books. You need to know something about every book, which I told you something about every, but you need to have read something in every book so that you will know what's going on. And it pretty much tells you, it follows the children of Israel. But it is not the history. Even though it's historical, they don't acknowledge history or writing the history of the children of Israel until they get to or back to the promised land. Then that's when we start history. I'm helping you to follow through the whole Bible, because the Bible is not a hodgepodge. You know, a lot of times in Sunday school, it never goes throughout the whole thing. It'll pick out one person, talk about him, talk about another person that's really totally unrelated and may not even be in the same time frame. And as a result, we don't get a continuation. But if you know how the Bible goes, it will help you to study when there is no one else around. when you don't have a preacher, when you don't have a Sunday school teacher. If you know where things are in the Bible, you can do it yourself. That's what God wants you to do when he says, study to show thyself approved, to become a workman who needeth not to be ashamed, rightly dividing the word of truth, and you won't be tossed to and fro by every wind of doctrine that the devil sends people to throw you off with. On television, on Facebook, they always got somebody crazy who is willing to be bought out by the devil, and they're telling you some things that are opposite and contrary, and sometimes sounds good for the situation you're in, but it's not true. But you don't know that if you don't know the truth. Questions, comments thus far? I'm gonna keep right on till I get to where we are. Now, the second section, of course, would be the history. And I said the history starts when they actually go into or back to the promised land. What do you mean when you hear the term they're going back? These are people who have been in Egypt 430 years. So that means nobody with this company that's with Joshua actually none of them have ever been to this promised land, but they're going back. So how could you explain that? All right. All right. So they've never been there, only their ancestors have talked about it. The Israelites had not been to the promised land in 400 plus years, 430 years. They say from Abraham to Moses is 430 years. So they just talk about, I'm going back to the promised land. Well, you can't go back nowhere you ain't never been. But that is what they mean. Their people had been there. The land had been given to Abraham, and God had given Abraham a promise. And because of that promise, those people have been told year in and year out for 400 years that God is going to restore them to the promised land, the land he gave them, a land filled with milk and honey. He promised you that, and you're going to have it. So in 430 years, they didn't give up hope. They said one day God is going to come through with his promise, and that's what happened. So if people willing to wait 430 years, we had to wait about 400. Yeah, we waited about the same if we couldn't think about it. Okay, and so they're there. Joshua is the first group of people to get there. Moses did not make it to the Jordan. He didn't get to the Jordan River, where it was considered to be the boundary. When you cross over Jordan, you're in the promised land. That's why our old ancestors would sing about Jordan River. I'm bound to cross. Because if you cross Jordan River, that means you're in the promised land. That's what that was about. And they got that direct correlation from the biblical story of Jordan River. They said Jordan, though. Yeah, they said Jordan River, I'm bound to cross. In fact, when they recorded the song, it was Jordan River, you had to look up there to see Jordan and know they were talking about Jordan because they were saying Jordan. You have a question? Some of that is in, some of that would be found in the book of Joshua. Yes. Now some of the wording may not be accurate, but the events are. They did divide the land up when they first got there. They divided the land up by the 12 tribes. Each one got a section. Now that caused a problem because they had been united. Now everybody got their own section, so they became overly possessive, and to the point where God had instructed them to make sure that all of the people who occupied their land, because that land was given to Abraham 400 years earlier, But in 400 years, think of how many people can populate an area. Just think about the United States in 1600. We had a group of people to come and populate Jamestown. Then we had a group of people that came and populated Plymouth Rock in Massachusetts. And then over time, they started populating. That was 1600. So by 2000, how many people have came to America? You can consider that same type of scenario would have happened in the land of the children of Israel, that people who came and saw that it was a land of milk and honey. They said, well, there ain't nobody living here. We'll stay here. And so they gained roots and generations over 400 years. I'm trying to put this in reality because that's why they had to fight so much. You know, these people have been established there for years and years and years, centuries. And to think about it, I don't want to take you too far ahead, but there was a second Exodus some thousands years later, and the same thing happened. People have inhabited the land and they had to fight them again. And they had in actuality, a third Exodus in 1948 when Jews came from all over the world to go right back to the land that God gave Abraham, and there are people living there because nobody was living there. The Jews left there in 70 AD when they burned Jerusalem down. They tore the temple down, and most of the children of Israel left and went everywhere else. And in 1948, they're going to come back and say, this is my land? Well, that's what happened. And that's why they're still fighting today. Because everybody around them are those people from Mesopotamia and Canaan that they were fighting in biblical times. So that's why it's important for you to learn the roots of it so that you understand the present day, the scenario of the present day. Questions, comments, because I don't want to get too far down the line and you didn't get the first point and I'm on point number 9. So we want to make sure that everybody's got some basics. And as was stated, Sister McIver Roberts was saying that in the book of Joshua, of course, they started dividing up the land. The first real contest was to go against people in a walled city. And we have a group of people who really are not in army. They have not practiced warfare. They are told by God that everything, that's yours, that city is yours. And of course, it was a walled city. The Bible says that the children of Israel did not have to use any weapons. God had already promised them through prophecy that you will access cities that you did not build. You will benefit from vineyards that you didn't plant. And all of this came to pass when they got to Jericho. Jericho was a walled city. And the people in the walled city said, well, y'all come on. We got the stuff. We got anybody who tries to penetrate the defenses of this city, they're going to have to exact a huge price in death because we have an impenetrable wall. And the people of the children of Israel, the only thing they did, well, tell me what they did. So I don't have to tell y'all. I try not to say y'all know the story because preachers use that all the time. Y'all know the story, and they don't know the story. What is the story? They marched around it, and they marched around it, seven times. Actually, they marched around it, seven days. But the seventh day they did more than march around one time. But so, and they blew the trumpets, and nobody had to use a weapon. And the walls of that impenetrable city that you could not breach the walls of that city. They knew it. And God showed them who was in charge. And as a result, the power of God made them victorious. And so all the rest of the people in that region, they heard about the children of Israel who have a God that is powerful. So that's what that was about. But they had to always lean and depend on God. And we find out in their next campaign that they didn't do all that God said do. And as a result, it was not so easy. Instead of being victorious, they had to run away, And they were wondering, say, well, the God that we came here with, that brought us over the Jordan River, that caused us to be able to defeat this walled city of Jericho, now we go against a city of Ai, and they run us away like we're cowards. And it's all because they were disobedient to God, which brings about the book of Judges, because the book of Judges tells us of how the children of Israel, this is the worst book of the New Testament, the worst epitaph, or the worst testimony of the children of Israel is the book of Judges. I'll say that again. The worst testimony of the children of Israel is in the book of Judges, because it says that the people of God, whom God has delivered, gave them their own land, brought them through many dangers, toils and snares. Now they turn their back against God, and God abandons them, or he gives them up and allows the enemy to destroy them. But when they humble themselves, God comes and rescues them by sending them one of their own, takes a person from their tribe to be their deliverer. And the deliverer was called a judge. And that's why I say we have to understand that we cannot use the same terminology that we use, the same word we use to describe what was being used in the time of Judges. Because we want to think of a judge, that we have a picture of a judge, but that's not the picture of a judge that's in the book of Judges. You always keep that in mind. That is what I mean when I talk about hermeneutics, is making sure that you understand the traditions, customs of a distinctive period of time, and not try to impose your current standard on what was done then. Up to date, everybody? Okay. And the book of Judges, of course, it outlines those individuals who were selected. All of them were distinctively different. They're about as different as two left shoes. In fact, one of them was left-handed. And we have to understand that even today, the prevalency of left-handed people is still minimal. That means a minority of people are left-handed. A very, very small minority. At that time, left-handed was almost like an abnormality. Yeah. In fact, that there was something was wrong with you if you were left-handed. It was you were made wrong. And so they kept that in their psyche. And as a result, a left-handed man who God chose to be a judge became a hero, because he killed a man with his left hand, because nobody didn't think you're supposed to use your left hand. That's just how, but anyway, you can read that. Ehud is his name. A left-handed man who they checked him for weapons, but they checked it the way they would check a right-handed man. Now, the people at the airport, they don't care. They check like you got, like you're even-handed. And they check both sides, both insides your legs and outside your legs. So straight down your back, because you know somebody gonna be slick and try to have something right down, straight down their back. They do all of that, but they didn't do it in Judges, and as a result. Now, during the time of Judges, they were still separate. And so comes the book of Ruth. The book of Ruth, if you would read in this book right here, That's why, everybody who writes a book don't mean that they know everything they're talking about. They put Ruth as one of and listed her under the judges. Now, she lived during the time of the judges, but she was definitely not a judge. She was a Gentile. The reason why she's so important, she lived during the time of judges. How do we know that? We can see that they didn't have a king, and they were still living tribally, because Ruth ended up living in the tribe of Judah by invitation of her mother-in-law, Naomi. So by her being there, she was a Gentile, an outsider who, if we would look at the modern Jewish standard, she would have been more or less like the persons that we said who are trying to become a Jew, but they were not born a Jew. Anybody remember that term? A proselyte. She would have been considered a proselyte, because she said, she told Naomi that wherever you lodge, I'll lodge. Wherever you lodge, I'll lodge. Whoever your God is going to be my God, and whatever. So that means she was trying to be like the children of Israel. Keep in mind, we're still not calling them Jews yet. Why? I mean, if you're studying the Bible, you need to know at what point in the Bible they start changing and start calling them something else. Right now, they're still children of Israel. When they came back from Babylon, that's exactly right. When they came back from the Persian captivity, and they were in Babylon because the Persians defeated Babylon, and when they take over a country, whatever the country was, it still is just under a different king. So they took over the Babylonians, their slaves in their territory. And so the children of Israel were still living in Babylon, even though the Persian king let them go back to their habitat where their ancestors came from. And that was in Jerusalem, in Judea. And that's when they become Jews, or people start calling them Jews. And when the Bible starts naming them as Jews. So people studying the Bible now, if they don't know this, they're going to call Moses a Jew. They're going to call Abraham a Jew. Y'all understand what I'm saying? They're going to call Solomon a Jew. And they weren't. All right? Just like, you have to correlate it, and I use this comically. Over time, we've been called Negro, colored. It was a while before we started accepting being called black, even though the word Negro means black. and the people who were transporting the slaves were Spanish. They were the first transporters, and so they the ones started calling the slaves Negro because that's what they saw it as, black. There was nothing derogatory about it. They were just real dark-skinned, and they said they were black. They said Negroes, and by the time they got down south, they had lazy tongues in the south, so they couldn't say Negro. They couldn't put all them syllables together, and so they gave us another derivative. But we've gone through the name change over various sections of time in our history. And so you have to understand the children of Israel are the same way. They original Hebrew. And that's because if I say it enough times, you'll get it. Why did they start calling Abraham a Hebrew? Oh, he the first one. He the first Hebrew. He crossed many rivers, and he came from Mesopotamia, and people in Mesopotamia didn't leave Mesopotamia and go to Egypt. You had to cross many rivers to get there. And they said it's an unusual group of people. They left this place where wherever you're born, you're supposed to die in that same place. It's still in the psyche of many people that your hometown is your hometown. And some people, regardless of they living in New York, they bring them back to their hometown to be buried. They still do that because that's in our psyche that wherever you were born, Now, where you need to go back. Okay. Yes, question. Okay.
That the could you make the leap that the Persians are now the present day Iranians?
That is true.
Okay, because then Cyrus was an ancestor of the Iranians,
That is correct.
and Cyrus helped sent the Jews back to.
He allowed them to, in fact, he gave them safe passage through the empire to get back to restore their city, which was Jerusalem, and to restore the temple, which was in Jerusalem. Yes.
And so now we are in bringing that to present day. Now the descendants of Cyrus and Israel are sworn enemies.
They're sworn enemies, but it didn't get that way. It got that way really after Jesus. I'm gonna explain it better.
Okay.
600 years after Jesus, we have somebody called Muhammad. And Muhammad was raised up under the law and was knowledgeable of Christianity. Those were the two religions that he would have been privy to and brought up under. Either he was under the Judaism or Christianity. So he was very knowledgeable and had access to an Old Testament and a New Testament, 600 AD. All right. Now, when he said that he got a vision from the angel Gabriel, the same angel that's in the New Testament, that told him that he needed to cleanse the religion of the Christians and the Jews was now pretty much had been infiltrated by the devil, and it was his job to clean it. And so he had a campaign that he got from God through the angel Gabriel that we need to put Christianity under the submission of God, of Allah. They could either submit and accept Allah or die. And so he had a campaign of you either convert to Islam or you die. So that's in 600. So from that time onward, most of the Middle East, all of that Persian Empire, pretty much changed over to Islam, and it spread to Africa. Keep in mind that Christianity had already been entrenched in Africa. And this is 600 AD, and they took over Africa and went up through Europe. They started through Portugal and Spain, and they called them, they didn't never want to call them Negro and nothing like that. They call them Moors. Well, they were Black African people who had come through the Middle East, through down through Africa, and were going up through the southern part of Europe. Now, this is in about 1200 AD. And they were taken over. In fact, you go to Spain now, you still see Moorish influences, and they didn't have a problem with Black people. They still don't, most of them, but they were about to be taken over. But all of the European nations got together to make sure that they bound together with with Catholicism, because we still didn't have Protestant. We still had the Pope and Catholicism in the 1200s. And all of the Christians under Catholicism banded together to fight against this religion called Islam. And they cleared Europe of the Islamic influence, but they didn't take it away from, they couldn't get to Africa. Still, Africa and the Middle East still maintain Islam. And that goes right on up to the present day. The Crusades started after 12. This is before the Crusades. The first thing they did was cleanse, make sure that the Crusades start like 1300s, 1400s. And when you start the Crusades, they were going over to Israel and try to cleanse Israel, take Israel back from the Islamic, because Islam had taken over all of the Middle East. That's where the Crusades, but all of the Middle East, all that we named about Persia and Iran, Iraq, because we didn't know anything about Iran and Iraq until after World War II. That's when they started. All of that was Saudi, it was kind of like Arabia, all of it. But yeah, you got the right idea. But yes, it don't go back as far as when it goes back just to Islam taking over around Jerusalem, and the Crusades were Christianity trying to take Israel back to make it Christian again. They weren't even concerned about Judaism. They were concerned more about Christianity because they believed that that's where the center of Christ was in Jerusalem. And the Jews had lost it. Islam took it, and the Crusades over a couple of hundred years fought against the Arabian or the Islamic people, and they call it a jihad. The same thing that the reason the Islamic people still call it a jihad, because it's a holy war against infidels, which is Christian people. And the Islam people call Christian people infidels. And so that's where the fight is, and that's the fight that's still going on. Now, I might have thrown some people off, but I'm hoping that somebody got caught on. But yes, all those people from the Middle East eventually became Islamic. And that used to be the center of Christianity. But in 600 AD, well, not in 600, somewhere in there, is when Islam came into power. And they, of course, had the vision that everybody who was not a Muslim need to either convert to Muslim or Islam or die. And they gave people, when they went to towns and they were a Christian town, they gave them the option. You want to be a Muslim or you want to die? And those who said, I'm on the Lord's side and I'll serve until I die. Okay, well, they kill you. And all the rest of them say, Assalamu alaikum.
Pastor,
Yes.
Brother McGavin asked the same question. I was
Okay,
going
ahead.
back to that same point. That is, Iran is the Persians.
Mhm.
And of course, you would think they'd be nicer to Israel. Well, they let Israel go back in that day, but I'm glad you explained the transition that had been made.
In between.
Yeah, that's Persia. Iran is Persia, and they let them go out of captivity. But that was way back when, and a lot of things has happened since that time. And that's where we find ourselves now, as the pastor explained. A lot of water under the bridge.
A lot of
and
water.
they're sworn enemies for sure now.
Oh, yes. And the opposite of that is Christianity. Like in the Crusades, all the Christians, they considered themselves to be righteous, and all Islamic were pagan or not of God. And so they were sworn enemies. We think today, because the people of the Islamic religion always say death to the West, because the West is mostly Christian. Death to the Western civilization. Everybody in Europe and America are the Western religion. They say death to the West because they believe that they are against God, because they believe that if you for God, you would be a Muslim. A Muslim is somebody who loves God. So that's their belief, and they're sticking to it. Most of their belief system is Old Testament. They use the Old Testament as their premise because you understand that their father is also Abraham. All right. Now, that may throw some people off, But Abraham has three religions that come from him: Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. All of them acknowledge that Abraham is their father. They have faith through Abraham. Okay. That's biblical now. I mean, that's biblical. All right. I hope that helped somebody else, because somebody else might have had that question or had not even thought about that. But I'm glad that you got some extra. So I think I was talking, the reason we got off on that is because I was talking about Ruth and how that Ruth was considered to be an outsider. But the thing is, what makes Ruth significant as a book, it was done during the time that they were in the period of Judges where they did not have a king, but God had a divine plan in mind where he utilized Ruth to marry into the tribe of Judah. And she married a man called Boaz. And that's why they encourage women today to marry somebody like Boaz and not a bozo. Marry a Boaz and not a bozo. Boaz was of the tribe of Judah, and God saw fit that whoever would be the king over the united nation of Israel would be from the tribe of Judah. And so we find that Boaz and Ruth had a son named Obed, and Obed begat Jesse, and Jesse begat David the king. That's exactly how it's written. And from there, we get all the way down to we get, and that is why the blind man in the New Testament said, Jesus, son of David. Now, the people around him say, what in the world is he talking about? His daddy named Joseph. But see, he knew prophetically who he was, and he knew that he spiritually he had to be, given that through a spiritual knowledge, because everybody around him thought Jesus was born in Nazareth. He was not born in Nazareth. He was raised in Nazareth, but he was born in Bethlehem. See, we know that they didn't. You understand? We have an overview, a whole bird's eye view of the Bible. They only had just a vision of it from what's right in front of them.
Pastor, would you speak to, since we only have a couple minutes, speak to diversity, because that is diversity, and we have this what is right mentality right now. We have, throughout the Bible, diversity has creeped into how God has developed us as Christians, and somehow we're trying to purge it in these latter days as we move forward.
Now Ruth was a Moabite, and that places her somewhere within the Canaanite region, also from the Mesopotamia region. She had to have been somewhere in that region, but she was not of the Jewish heritage. And Jews at the time, they were very prejudiced, and still are. You got to be a Jew to associate with us. You have to be a Jew to associate with. They don't normally. That's how that genre is. That's the way that they were brought up religiously. But here we see purposely that God takes somebody outside of that Jewish family. Well, I'm saying Jewish family because I'm looking at it from Jesus' perspective, but from the children of Israel, and marries her with somebody who is in the heart of the children of Israel, the tribe of Judah, where kings will come from. That is where David comes from. And God had made the specification, as we read through all of the Psalms, they would make it known that David is the primary example of a king, and that except you be of the house of David, then you're not even a legitimate king. So Jesus ends up being, his foreparents were diversity. You got somebody who is outside of outside of the whole tribe of Israel, who is someone that the average person of Israel would have said they're an outsider. In fact, we talk about that in the New Testament. They said if you're not a Jew in the New Testament, they say if you're not a Jew, you're a Gentile. And a Gentile is a dog. It's like a dog. They ain't count for nothing. In fact, they approached Jesus one time, and the woman said that, can you help me? And Jesus said pretty much, I can't help you. You're outside of my family. And the woman said, well, even dogs eat crumbs from the table. And so he made it, where she was equating herself to even a dog, as Jews did in their particular lifetime. Yeah, when you start talking about the Bible, you can get, sometimes you think you're off key, but it's something that somebody needed to tie the fabric together. Because we ought to be able to tie the fabric together. We ought to be able to join it together and say this comes first. Because, some people still don't. If you put up 4 names, you wouldn't know which came first, the chicken or the egg. But Abraham, Moses, Noah, and Joseph together, and you don't know who come first. And you need to know who came first, because there's something significant about that. You need to be able to go from time frame to time frame. And each character, I normally, at some point in time, will give you 12 characters of the Bible, 12 different people, and if they will tell you 16 people. They will tell you the whole Bible story from Genesis all the way to the New Testament by following those 12 characters. Questions, comments? So when we go through the history, we start with Joshua, we end with Esther. Now, Esther and Nehemiah, Ezra and Nehemiah and Esther. That ends the history. Now, let me tell you what's significant about Ezra, Nehemiah, and Esther. They are in the same time frame. Ezra and Nehemiah in the Hebrew Bible is one book. It's Ezra-Nehemiah. We break it up, Ezra and then Nehemiah. Nehemiah was a cupbearer to the king of Persia, going back to the king of Persia. He's the one who let them go. And he saw that Nehemiah was sort of languishing about what his ancestors had. And so the king of Persia, Darius at the time, decided that he would let Nehemiah, who was his cupbearer. Now, for us, that sounds like, what is that? Somebody carried a cup. Well, actually, he had a multiple thing. He tasted the food and drink the wine before the king did it, and the king would eat and drink after him. He was just testing to make sure nobody don't poison the king. And so that's an important job. So, you like that man, that man can get whatever he needs. He's protecting me. Oh, well, they got somebody who does that. That the food official. Make sure that it's right. Yeah. And because that's the best way to get to the soldiers is through their stomach. I mean, an army is run on their stomach. If you don't feed them right, they ain't gonna fight right. Okay. And what else was I trying to make? Ezra and Nehemiah, they were the ones who were able to go back and start rebuilding Jerusalem in the land of Judah. They were the group that was given the protection of the king of Persia to go back. That means they have freed all of those Israelites who had been previously under the command of the Babylonians. Persians came and destroyed the Babylonians. How did we know that? We saw the handwriting on the wall. The handwriting on the wall was when Babylon was in charge, and God sent the handwriting on the wall to tell you your time is numbered, your time is about up, and it won't long before the Persian Empire came and destroyed Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonian Empire. And the man who was the prophet during that time was Daniel. Daniel was there when Babylon came and took Israel into captivity. And he was an old man when Persia let the children of Israel go back. So he saw in his lifetime the divine providence of God, how that he was a young boy, one of those little Hebrew boys. Now, most of the time you don't hear nothing about, but Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, but that won't even their real names. So Daniel was one of them too. Those are just examples of the young boy. Daniel was one of them too, and that won't his real name. Okay, so the significance of this is Ezra and Nehemiah went back to the promised land, and Esther and her group stayed. They stayed in the Persian Empire, but they were free. And you get her story about what happened. So that is telling us that all of the Israelites who had been displaced did not go back to their promised land. And we see evidence of that now, because there was a time when there were more Jews in America than in Israel. That has changed. They have started repopulating Israel, and they are using more land than belongs to them. That's what caused the problem back in October when they had that raid from the Palestinians. They did not raid Israel. They went in an area that don't belong to Israel. Israel just had taken it over and put houses there. And they're still doing it. That's what the war is going on. They just, if they had stuck to the land that the United Nations gave them, which they said God gave it to you. We don't have it in the record book, but we'll go along with that. Because America and England believe that you have to do what the Bible says. Those who bless Israel will be blessed. Those that curse Israel be cursed. And so America has always stuck with that. But Donald Trump has fluctuated on that. Y'all notice he ain't always been for Israel. But all of a sudden, he on the Israel side. There was a time we didn't care nothing about Israel. Okay. That's all I'm going to talk about today. So that's the difference. That's how we have had people who were outside of Israel and those who were inside Israel. At one time, there were more Jews in America than there were in Israel. They had to import Golda Meir from New York City, who became the first premier in 1948. And from that time on, they got somebody called Benjamin Netanyahu now. And he wants to keep a war going because whenever the war is over, they're going to impeach him. So as long as he keep a war going, same thing with Trump. As long as Trump keeps something going, nobody won't think about impeaching him as long as he keep it going. All right. Yeah. Hopefully, you got something tonight. It may not have been what you were looking for, but we hope that you get something every time that you come. Let us stand, and we're going to have someone to give us our closing prayer. Amen. The designated prayer warrior is not here, so somebody. Okay, you here. You own it. All right, you own it. Yes, Lord.
Thank you for the manifestation that you still upon us, Heavenly Father.
Thank you.
If we don't do nothing else, Lord, we want to say thank you now.
Yes.
Lord, we ask for safe travel and mercy back to our home, Father. Climbing in the same condition, if not better, Lord. Lord, we ask you bless those that have the desire to be with whatever unknown reason or not, Lord. Lord, we ask you bless those online, Father. You still with them, Father. Lord, we just thank you for everything you've done and what you do and what you will come to do, Father. And Lord, if there's anything we've said, done, or even thought today that's unpleasing to our sight, Father, Lord, we ask for that forgiveness, Lord. These things in Jesus' name, Lord, I pray. Amen.
Amen. I just about put away my winter clothes. Had to go back and get some.